Photography is not an uncommon hobby, but it can be easy to get distracted by the technicalities like the camera settings, one light setups, or the lens specifications, because all those things are the kinds of things that people tend to explain when they explain beginner photography. But instead, there's something even more important that people tend to gloss over, but that can make your photos even better than those technicalities, terms and conditions apply, that we think you should know first, and that's what we're going to be discussing in this episode. Hello, I'm Noah from Anything Cameras, the channel that focuses on helping you improve your filming and photography. And this magical thing that I was hinting to in the intro that can make your photos better than the technicalities can, well, bear with me here because this will seem anticlimactic, but it's the emotion and the storytelling behind the photo. But before you leave this video, whether that's because you disagree with me or because you don't think it's that important, just hear me out for a minute. First off, I do want to let you know that this is actually going to be a 5-part mini-series about beginner photography. So while today is all about the story and the emotion, and while that theme is going to be carried throughout the episodes, we will still teach you those technicalities because, as I said, they are important and you need to understand how your camera works. But back to the story of photography. Maybe you don't think it's that important. Maybe you don't think it can make your photos that much better, or maybe you just disagree with me. Maybe you think that photos don't tell a story or portray emotion. But there are several examples that can kind of prove you wrong if you think that is the case. For example, look at paintings. Take, for example, the Mona Lisa. Probably you're in agreement with me that it's not the most stellar brushwork ever, not the most unique technical painting there is, but there's something so iconic about that painting because of the woman being painted and her expression. That's what made it famous, and that's because it makes us feel something, and it tells a story about that woman and her personality and what she was feeling. The most famous photographs and the most famous photographers, the ones in magazines and National Geographic, are the ones that tell a story. That's what photojournalism is all about. It's telling a story through photos. But you also have to keep in mind that storytelling in photography is not quite as prominent as in something like video, where you have effectively 2 more dimensions to work with. You have multiple frames, moving visuals to work with, and you also have audio. In photography, you don't have any of those things. You just have one single frame to tell your story, so oftentimes it's much more abstract. Okay, well, what if you still disagree with me? Or even if you do agree with me now, I want to try an exercise with you. I'm going to do this exercise right here. I'm going to pull out my phone, and I'm just going to pull up one of the photos I've taken when practicing photography. Alright, so I have this photo pulled up now. This is a photo I took one time when we were camping, and how this exercise is going to work is we're going to base it off of a very famous saying. A photo is worth 1,000 words. There's almost no doubt that you have heard this photo before, and maybe you didn't think that much of it, but this is a very true saying. So in this photo, we can try to use lots of words. It doesn't have to be 1,000. I'm not going to keep you here all day to describe it. We have this island in the middle of what looks to be a small lake or a large pond. It's sometime around sunrise or sunset. It's probably around summertime. The water is very clear and reflective. But that's about it, really. It's a pretty photo, sure, but what more would you use to describe it? But now I want you to pull up a different photo. I want you to pull up a photo that you may have taken, or someone else may have taken, say of you and your friends, or something with more sentimental value to you. Now do the same thing. Describe in this photo what's going on. So we have these 2 young guys. They look to be in front of some sort of stage maybe. This one has a camera. Obviously these 2 guys are good friends because they're very relaxed and goofy with each other. It looks like they're photographing or recording some type of performance maybe, because they're both dressed pretty well. And as I said, it looks like they're in front of some kind of stage. And you know, it kind of makes you smile to see these 2 guys acting so goofy together, you know? At least it does if you're one of the guys in the photo, which, you know, I am. But anyway, do you see how that photo has much more meaning and has more emotion and story to it than just the photo of the pretty landscape? Now, don't get me wrong, landscape photography and photos like those are still very important and definitely still have some form of emotion or story to them, and we're going to touch on that more later. But this example is a very just cut and dry, sort of definite example of why photos tell a story. Okay, so we have determined that photos tell a story. They have some form of emotion behind them, and that's what gives them meaning. But what about the technicalities, like camera settings, lighting, lens specifications, camera specifications? Where do those come in? Are they important? How do they affect storytelling? Well, yeah, they are still really important. And part of the reason is not only does it allow you to capture the image the way you want it to be captured, but it also contributes towards the story of the photo. You know, if you have your camera settings set way too high and everything is super overexposed and there's no detail in the image, well then, not only is it going to be a trash image, but there won't be any story in it because you've lost all the detail that could possibly be telling a story. So how can you add story to your photography? Well, storytelling, especially in photography, can be really hard to master. And so it's just going to be sort of something you do over time if you want to pursue it. And as I said, with photography, you don't have that much to work with. You have one frame, and that's it. It's not video where you have the moving visuals and the audio. It's not like writing where you can use as many words and as many pages as you want to describe every little detail. You get that one frame. And by the way, just before I continue on, if you want to go even more in depth, I've linked a few articles from various blogs below that we really like and think really emphasize the story behind photography well. I want to keep this somewhat brief and touch on many different subjects, so I won't be going incredibly in depth. When trying to tell a story through your photo, oftentimes the easiest way to find that story, find that emotion, and emphasize it in your photo is to ask yourself one question. What emotion should the subject of the photo be feeling? Now, of course, this won't always be the best place to start because sometimes the subject of your photo can't feel an emotion. If you're photographing something alive, like an animal or a person, then sure. But what if you're doing product photography or nature photography? Well, in that case, you want to ask yourself a similar question. What emotion do you want the viewer of the photo to feel? However, in most cases, at least when it comes to portrait photography or some similar genre, starting with the question, what should the subject be feeling, is a great place to start. For instance, say you are photographing some Grammy award-winning musical artist, and they just won the Grammy, and they're feeling very triumphant about it and very proud of their work. Then that's what they should be feeling, and that's what will come across in the photo if you just kind of roll with that feeling. You want to maybe get a little bit of a lower angle to make them seem bigger and more grand. Make sure that the lighting isn't gloomy and sad looking. In something like event photography, the work is actually already half done with you, because oftentimes, most times, the event is going to be designed to make the attenders of the event feel something. For instance, a wedding. Obviously, the bride and groom are going to be very happy, hopefully, about getting married, and the design of the event is a reflection of that joy that the bride and groom are, again, hopefully feeling. But, as I said, your work is only half done because you still have to tell a story through each individual photo, but also through multiple photos. Now, before I go on, I have been rambling quite a bit about how important story is in photography and how you should try capturing the emotion and the story behind the event or the person. But I should also tell you that this may not be your style or what the client wants. The typical photos that you think of when you think of portrait photography or whatever, where it's just a person standing there looking nice with some nice lighting, those kinds of photos are still important. They still have their place, and they do still portray some emotion and some story. They're not completely meaningless. So you don't have to stop shooting like that, but at the same time, you can try to begin capturing more of the person and their personality instead of just their likeness. But I feel like I haven't quite thoroughly answered how you can add story into your photography. Say you have a client who wants regular old family photos. How can you tell a story through those photos and bring the family's personality into them instead of just the usual staged family looking at you smiling? Because oftentimes the family doesn't just want to capture the family's likeness, as I said, they want to capture the dynamics of the family love that is between them, maybe even the sibling rivalry. So it's your job as a photographer to find a way to get that across. Some photographers, there's this really good webinar from B&H that I'll put in the description down below, and this family photographer says that she rarely has the family look at the camera because she would rather have them look at each other and capture that dynamic between the family. With individual portraits, at a first thought, it may seem harder, but in many cases it might actually be easier, because there's one simple thing you can do to help capture that person's personality, what they love, and that is to have them doing what they love. If you have someone who really enjoys painting, and they want to see in your photos, then sure, get photos of them with their college paraphernalia on, outside, leaning in against a tree or whatever. But then also ask them if they want some photos of them doing what they love or what they're going to be going to college for. Maybe that's painting. Maybe that's even coding. The options are endless. Okay, we're almost done here. I just have one more point I want to talk about, and that is landscape photography or nature photography or even product photography. Let me use landscape as an example here. First off, the story and the emotion behind it is often going to be a little bit more abstract. It's not going to be as clear because you don't have a person in the photo feeling that emotion. But if you have a picture of a nice pretty sunset, then probably the scene is going to look calm and peaceful, and that feeling is going to be portrayed through the image. You should also consider that there's always one person in the photo, and I use "in" loosely there because they're not necessarily in the photo. That's a photographer. Instead, they're behind the camera taking the photo, meaning that essentially the photographer is putting themselves into the photo by capturing this how they see it effectively. But if nothing else, a nature photo or a landscape photo will at least hint towards the larger story of how that natural occurrence came to be there, how that flower grew. Maybe there's a bee pollinating it. That tells the story of the flower and the bee, both of them, and how they are growing and interacting with the world around them. So be sure to keep watching this mini-series because, as I said, we're going to go into some more technicalities, but stick with that theme of the emotion behind story.